Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, I'm going to talk about what is the limit of freedom of speech. What is the absolute most that it should be legal for someone to say in a country like Great Britain without there being legal consequences? Now, I happen to be very much on the side of freedom of speech. I think that with a few exceptions, we should try and push the boundary to encompass as much as what people say as we possibly can, because it's important for views to be heard. If you don't know what people think, and the only way you're going to know that is if you listen to them, you don't know what people actually believe. And I think that's one of the big reasons why I think it's important to have freedom of speech. But ladies and gentlemen, there are some very difficult things that you have to deal with if you have this view. For example, in multicultural Britain, there are different cultures which hold different views regarding child marriage. And whether that's a good thing or not, in their view, that's actually something that's permissible. You can do this, it can be a good thing. In fact, in their view, the greatest person who ever existed, in the Islamic concept this would be Muhammad, did do this. And therefore, it is a good thing to have marriage, and that encompasses everything in marriage, including consummating that marriage. So that includes having sex with an underage child. That is the Islamic paradigm from a traditional, orthodox, majority view. This isn't some weird, obscure view. This is the majority view from Sunni Islam, one of the major branches of Islam. And what prompted me to want to look at this is a video that came online just a few days ago at Speaker's Corner, the place of freedom of speech, as many of these kind of controversial questions do tend to come from Speaker's Corner. And since Speaker's Corner has a large Islamic influence, I think listening to people who speak there as representatives of their faith, who have platforms, public platforms, and who publicly give their opinion as being authoritative, I think it's important to hear what they have to say. And that's why this shocked me, because I wasn't prepared for just how blatant this was going to be. Before we watch this clip, I want you to understand, the cameras have just started rolling. This conversation happened a bit before this. I happen to know both the people in this video. We have, on the left, we have Yemeni, a Muslim apologist who, let's just say he's done some spicy things. You can look at the video up here to see some of the public threats of violence he's been involved in towards Christians, which is still publicly available on his channel as far as I remember. And on the right, you have Ishmael, who is an ex-Muslim. He was a Muslim, he then left Islam, regardless of the potential death penalty that could imply upon him at some point, and became a Christian. And ever since becoming a Christian and leaving Islam, one of the things he wants to do is to talk about Christianity to Muslims and try to get them to understand that Christianity is a much more loving religion, compassionate religion, but also, most importantly, it's closer to the truth. So big respect to Ishmael. I think he did a great job in this video. But let's just see how the Muslim starts off. Like, this is the very beginning of the footage. Let's watch this.
Will I do it? I said yes. Okay.
If Allah told you to marry a little girl, would you
yes.
do it?
Okay. Yeah, look at the camera.
Allah told you to
If
marry
Allah
a 6-year-old,
yes.
you'll marry a 6-year-old?
Yes.
Brother, come on, man.
Yes. Allah's command. Allah will never command me to do something that is incorrect. Okay?
Would you marry a 6-year-old? Yemeni is asked by Ishmael. Yemeni responds with, yes, I would. Now, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, which is perhaps more than I should do. The reason why Ishmael said 6 is because Muhammad, the prophet in Islam, had sex according to Orthodox Islam, Sunni sources. Muhammad had sex with Aisha, one of his wives, because Muhammad had between 9 and 11 wives, and also sex slaves, female slaves who he had sex with. We're not sure as to the number of those. But in terms of his wife Aisha, he married her in terms of betrothal at the age of 6. So she's 6 years old. He's 51, I think, roughly at this point. They're not doing anything at this point. And Islamic sources are clear that when she became 9, that's when Muhammad had intercourse with her. Yeah. I don't know where to take it from there. And this has always been one of the many difficult things when it comes to Islam, is trying to figure out how on earth do you interpret this? Because this isn't just a matter of fact. It's not just descriptive, right? It's not just saying, look, Muhammad did this. It was back then. You know, that was just then. He messed up. It's okay. We don't do that now. There is no command for us to do that now. It's not permissible for us to do that now as Muslims. So it's okay. That's not the case. And that's why it's really, really difficult. Because Muslims, through the Quran and through their own hadith, their own sources, Muhammad is seen as being greater than Jesus in a moral sense, because Muhammad is the greatest moral example for Muslims. and also for all of mankind. Every Christian kind of cringes at that because Jesus didn't have sex with a 9-year-old. Jesus didn't have multiple wives. Jesus didn't have sex slaves. So the very notion of this is incredibly offensive. And because of this reason, Muslims cannot say that they deny Muhammad's behavior. They condemn what he did in that instance as immoral. They cannot do this. They have to instead double down and say, no. What he did, having sex with a 9-year-old called Aisha when he was 54, around that age, is a moral act. And this is how it's been understood historically in the Islamic world. We can read Islamic materials that talk about this. Parts of the Sharia, the Islamic law, are influenced by this because ultimately it comes from the Sunnah, that is the life and actions and example of Muhammad. And if Muhammad did it, it at very least has to be permissible for other Muslims to do it, because there's nothing in their sources that talk about how this was a one-time deal, this was something that only Muhammad can do, this is something that only happens in the 7th century. No. Muhammad is the example for all mankind morally for all eternity. Therefore, if he does it, it must be in some sense permissible. And we can watch, just continuing with this video, how Yemeni, the Muslim, tries to get out of this by saying, well, I wouldn't do it today because today is the 21st century and that makes it different somehow. But you see, again, that is dangerously close to just condemning Muhammad's behavior, because Muslims are now saying, and they're forced to say this when they're encountering the West, when they encounter people who know this stuff and who bring it up to them, and they can't deny its validity because, as you see here, Yemeni affirms it. He knows the sources just as well as I do, just as well as Ishmael does, and just as well as many people in the comment section know these sources. So he can't deny it. He does say, yep, you can do this. This is a thing. There is no minimum age in Islam for sex. A 7th century 9-year-old girl in the Hijaz in Mecca in Saudi Arabia would have almost certainly been, to some degree, malnourished. There's actually other hadith sources to validate that, but let's just stay clear of those. Just prima facie, just looking at it in a totally neutral way. If you're in the middle of a desert, you have limited access to water and food because you don't live in a major area, you live in quite a remote area, as Mecca was, you're not going to have the best diet. You're just not going to have the best diet. We know that a girl's diet is one of the indicators for how soon a young girl, she begins, as part of puberty, her menstrual cycle. If you have a poor diet, we know scientifically that delays the point at which that starts in someone's life. So that, and based on other Islamic sources, Aisha was probably someone who has not yet started to have their menstrual cycle at the age of 9. She would not have had wide hips, she would not have had developed breasts or anything that comes along with later stages of puberty. She would have been, to anyone who was looking at her, prepubescent. That to me is horrific. I find that incredibly difficult to understand. If you go by the traditional account in Islam, I wouldn't know how to square that. If I had to put my, you know how they always say, you know, put yourself in other people's shoes, right? Okay, fine. I'll put myself in your shoes. If I had to believe that was not only just something acceptable, but as something that was part of the package of the greatest moral person in history, greater than Jesus, I wouldn't even know where to start. My mental capacity starts and ends there. Yeah. Hey, you know how you're a Christian and you know Jesus was the savior of the world who lived a sinless life? Oh yeah. Well, you see, Muhammad is actually greater than him for some reason, morally, and we ought to follow not Jesus's example, although that's okay, but Muhammad, he's even greater. Yes, he killed people. Yes, he tortured people. Yes, he did indeed have sex with many women, some of whom were his wives, plural, and some of whom were his sex slaves. Yes, he did indeed have sex with Aisha when she was 9, according to all the sources, but he's still better than Jesus somehow. That to me, no, I'm not doing it. That's crazy, that's messed up. I can't rationalize that, and I think for most people that's something that you can't even begin to get your head around. But Yemeni and other Muslim Dawah guys who want to spread Islam, who go and spend a good amount of their time, just like Christian evangelists do, going and talking to people about their faith, they have to contend with this. And in a Western world that is increasingly more aware of these things, they're realizing it's not good enough to rely on people's ignorance. You know, we have the internet now. Anyone can Google what I just said, and you're gonna have a fun day if you Google what I've been talking about in this video, because you'll realize that this is indeed a thing, and it is indeed something that many educated and knowledgeable Muslims, even more so than Yemeni, do indeed agree with and confirm. I don't think there is a way of reconciling this. I think this is a black and white issue. I think there is no way that the Western world can meet halfway and say, well, we don't necessarily agree with that, but you know what, we'll let you have your way of life. No. There is no compromise on this issue. If someone comes up to you and makes an argument for the permissibility or the greatness, morally speaking, of a fully grown adult who could be in his 50s having sex with a 9-year-old who has most certainly not even begun to menstruate, I think that's the end of the discussion. There's no compromise here. You have two fundamentally opposed worldviews that cannot be reconciled. If Muslims want to say, actually, you know what Muhammad did there was not good, it's not something we want to emulate, he erred when he did this, no person should do this because having sex with a 9-year-old is immoral, then I think we can have a conversation, because I think that's a reasonable and fair conclusion that Westerners, Christians, the English, the British can meet with. And I think until that happens, this is just a complete cut off issue. We don't have the idea of no minimum age in Christianity. In the Quran, it specifically has a verse in Surah 65, chapter 65, verse 4, for anyone who's interested in looking. It explicitly says that it's permissible to divorce someone who has not yet menstruated. What does that mean? Well, it means that they must have been married and they must have not menstruated yet. And who would that include? Mostly children. How did the scholars of Islam understand it? They understood it as talking about people who were immature. They were children. How do even great scholars of today who are Islamic think about it? They are immature, they are children. Contrast this with Christianity. There is no verse that says it's permissible to have sex with underage girls. We don't have the greatest moral figure in our faith, which is Jesus Christ, having sex with children. But we have Jesus in Matthew 18, verse 6, where he says that anyone who hurts one of these little ones who believes in me, it would be better for him that a millstone be wrapped around his neck and that he would be thrown into the depths of the sea. Jesus is very clear about how we are to think about child abuse. In Mark chapter 5, verse 41, Jesus, when speaking to a girl who was the age of 12, calls her little girl by saying Talitha kum, which means little girl, get up. So if Jesus thinks a 12-year-old is a little girl, I think a 9-year-old I think if he had heard about Muhammad having sex with a 9-year-old, I don't think he'd be particularly happy about it. Let's put it that way. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're not a Christian, then today's the day. You can email me at Chris@Speakers Corner. The email is down below. If you have any questions about the Christian faith, I'll do my best to answer you. And to everyone that's watching, I hope you have a great day. God bless.